Now the question is, what, and which is always asked is, what is the solution, and how can we have an ecological secure future in the Himalayas, for the people of this region. I would say that the first thing is that there are no shortcuts. There is no one size fits all kind of a solution, which is what we want, right? We want techno managerial solutions, because that is the fastest thing for any government to offer also. But the see, if you are going to say climate change mitigation, and then the only thing that you have in the name of mitigation is plantations, or you will say grow more trees. But the thing is that we have seen that if you plant the wrong trees in the wrong place, it can cause more detriment to the ecology than not having trees at all. Also, a lot of money is spent in the name of plantations. For instance, I'll give the example of Kinnaur itself. We did a study in this region. There's something called a compensatory afforestation plan, which is made, every time there is some forest which is going to get cut for a particular project. The government has there's a forest conservation act, which has a provision that you have to plant double the number of you have to cover double the number of area that you have cleared out with trees. And the trees that you are cutting are what? They are the local endangered, very difficult to grow. You'll have the devdar tree, you have the chilgoza pine tree, you will have juniper. These are temperate trees which are very unique to this area, and are important part of the local biodiversity. But when you have to grow, then what will you grow? You'll grow rubinia, grow alanthus. These are trees which are fast growing. They are not native to this area. They may have been brought from the plains or some other area. And you end up planting where? In areas which are temperate forests or some other kind of forest, in areas where people are grazing their animals. So without asking people, in a grassland, if you've planted trees, then people are going to lose. First, they lose lands to a particular project, then they will lose land in the compensatory afforestation plan also. So their livelihoods get hit twice, not once, and it is without their consent. And it also, you will plant in areas where there is no chance of survival. So what we found is that the survival rate of the campa plantations, of the compensatory afforestation plantations, was 10% in this particular study that we did in Kinnaur. So if you have such a poor survival rate, then what is the point of wasting those resources? And this whole idea that you can do damage in one place, and that damage can be reversed by planting trees in another place, this itself is a false solution. It's a way of just kind of sidelining or distracting from the issue. And also, many of these plants, etc., are, we've got local people have sent us pictures where the saplings are just thrown somewhere. They're not even planted, they are only on the paper. So there is no mechanism of, and there's no mechanism that the a forest department or the Ministry of Environment has to review the plantations that are taking place, and what is the success rate. This is a study that we did, but the government should be studying what is the survival rates. There's no records of this with the government. So yeah, and there are enough studies on this. So first of all, we need to call out the false solutions and don't fall for techno managerial solutions. This is an issue of policy, it is an issue of misgovernance. It's an issue of poor planning. It's an issue of top down centralized planning. And the only way to address it is to change the policy, review the policy, put in place governance mechanisms where people are involved, which are participatory, which have the view of the people, where a particular development is being planned. if you are going to in the Himalayas especially, but anywhere else, you have to have some kind of a land use planning, and that land use planning cannot be done in a top down manner because every area is different. So in for the Shivaliks, you will have a different kind of land use plan. What kind of construction is possible? Can you build an 8-story building in the upper Himalayas or not? You can't. You've seen the Shimla pictures of an 8-story building collapsing. All the buildings next to it are going to collapse now. In an area which is so vulnerable, you can't build, these many stories, multi-story buildings. So there's a need for land use planning. There's a need for town and country planning, which is participatory in nature, which involves people, which is not centralized, which involves all kinds of stakeholders. And we need to recognize that this is a political problem. The ecological crisis is also a social crisis because people don't have options of local livelihood. So they are also going to get into things that will create more inequities locally and will create more crisis as well. So this is not just an ecological crisis, is also a social crisis, is also an economic crisis, is also a political crisis. To separate out everything is not possible. And any kind of development, or any kind of, I would not use the word development because it is a beaten word and it is a taken word, so I will say that any kind of a way of being and living in this region needs to keep in mind certain principles. One is resilience. That means that you cannot, because this area has now become even more disaster prone, especially because of climate changes. Resilience is very important. Anything that builds resilience, whether it's a livelihood method, or it's a way of constructing the house, we need to look at resilience. Second is autonomy, because every there has to be decentralization. It can't be decided in Delhi what is going to happen in Himachal. So there has to be decentralization, and therefore some amount of dependence on the center will also have to reduce, which means you can't just take a development model from Maharashtra and stick it to Himachal Pradesh. You will have to have a very very localized kind of model of earning livelihoods for the local people. That has to be the priority. Sustainability, because it's not about this generation alone, it is about the coming generations also. And equity, the fourth thing, because the fact is that, like anywhere else in the country, even this area has caste and gender and other class inequities in society, and these also need to be addressed. And therefore voices of women, voices of certain communities, for instance pastoral communities, these need to come in because they are dependent more on the common lands. The fifth thing I want to talk about is the ownership of community over resources. The only way it can be participatory if local people have ownership over the resources. And for instance, now there's an act in the country called the Forest Rights Act. This act needs to be implemented in Himachal Pradesh. But Himachal is the worst implementer of FRA. So this gives right to local people to access, use, and protect their forests. So this is something that is just an example of how ownership can be given over resources. The same thing with water resources. If we want people to conserve water resources, if we want spring revival or underground water revival, then we would need to build. The users will need to have ownership over it. So that is something that community governances can only happen if there's community ownership. And last but not the least is we need to change our mindset about the current idea of development, which privatizes the profit, makes certain people rich, and passes the cost to certain people, or it is happening at the cost of certain people. And we are seeing this concentration of wealth in the hands of a few across the world because of the current development model. And the climate and the environmental crisis is also the is also a part of this.